The Montana wind carried ice crystals, like ground glass, across the forward operating base. Each gust felt like a slap from God himself, punishing any fool stupid enough to be standing in the open at 1400 hours on a January afternoon when the thermometer read -8 Fahrenheit before wind chill. The kind of cold that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground. The kind that made breathing feel like swallowing razor blades. "Go hide!" Sergeant Victor Hayes screamed through the blizzard, his voice barely cutting through the roar. "Get in that bunker, now, Ashford!" Kira Ashford struggled through ankle-deep powder, her left leg dragging with each step. The limp was pronounced, painful to watch, the kind of permanent injury that made grown men wince in sympathy. The medical kit clutched against her chest. She moved with the desperate slowness of someone whose body had betrayed them years ago and never quite forgiven the transgression. Captain Reed Blackwell stood near the command post, watching her painful progress with the calculation of a man who'd learned to count every asset and liability in the terrible mathematics of combat. His face was weathered granite, 42 years old but looking a decade older in the harsh light reflecting off snow. Eyes that had seen Fallujah and Helmand and a dozen other places that taught you which people could be trusted when the lights went out. "Ashford, that's a direct order." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "You stay in that bunker. When contact initiates, and it will, you hide. We cannot spare combat personnel protecting someone who can't keep pace. Do you understand me?" Kira stopped, turned to face him. Snowflakes caught in her dark hair, already going white with accumulation. Her face was angular, made sharper by winter and exhaustion. Pale gray eyes that reflected light without warmth, without expression, without anything that might tell you what she was thinking. "Yes, sir, I understand." Her voice was steady despite the cold, professional, empty of the pride that would have answered differently. She continued her limping progress toward the reinforced dugout that served as the medical station. 30 meters felt like 30 miles. The radio crackled with static and panic. "Actual, this is Overwatch. Thermal signatures, northwest quadrant, multiple contacts. Count 70 plus hostiles, 300 meters in closing. Organized formations, professional spacing. This is not local militia. Repeat, not local militia." "Say again, Overwatch. Confirm hostile count." 72. "I count 72 operators moving in coordinated assault pattern. Spetsnaz combat indicators." "Jesus Christ, Actual, we're looking at 4-to-1 odds here." Blackwell's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. Around him, 18 Marines moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons, adjusting positions, making peace with whatever god they prayed to when the math stopped working in your favor. 18 against 72 in a blizzard that grounded helicopters and turned the world into white chaos where you couldn't see your enemy until they were close enough to kill you. All positions, weapons free on confirmed hostile targets. We hold this position. Quick reaction force is en route, but weather delayed. ETA 6 hours. We hold for 6 hours. No retreat, no surrender, no one gets left behind. Clear? A chorus of affirmatives crackled back through the tactical net. Young voices trying to sound brave, mostly succeeding, some failing in ways that made your chest tight. Kira reached the bunker entrance. Hayes appeared beside her, scar tissue where his left ear should have been, making his profile instantly recognizable, even through the snow. 38 years old, the kind of NCO who'd seen enough combat to know what mattered and what didn't. "Get inside, ma'am. When the shooting starts, you keep your head down. We'll bring the wounded to you, but you do not leave this position. Captain's orders are direct and non-negotiable." She nodded, disappeared into the bunker. The space was barely large enough for 3 people. Sandbags stacked shoulder high, timber supports, the particular smell of dirt and old fear, and the kind of cold that seeped into places the sun never reached. Medical supplies were already organized with obsessive precision. Morphine, pressure bandages, surgical clamps, hemostatic agents, quick clot, chest seals. The tools of her chosen trade now, saving instead of ending, building instead of destroying. Hayes paused at the entrance, studied her with eyes that had learned to read people in the worst possible moments. You really think you can keep people alive out here? This far from support, this cold, odds like these? Kira looked at him. Let something true show in her eyes for just a fraction of a second. Something that didn't quite match the helpless, crippled nurse everyone assumed she was. I've kept people alive in worse places, Sergeant, under worse conditions, with less equipment. I'll manage. Something in his expression shifted, not understanding exactly, just the recognition that maybe she wasn't quite what she appeared. That still water sometimes ran very deep and very dark. Then he was gone, back into the storm, back to his fighting position, back to the business of being ready to kill or die, or both, in the next 6 hours. Kira stood alone in the bunker. Around her, the base came alive with coordinated violence preparation. Marines establishing interlocking fields of fire. Sergeants barking range estimates and sector assignments. Diesel generators coughing to reluctant life. All the sounds of men preparing for something they hoped wouldn't come, but knew probably would. The storm intensified. Visibility dropped to 20 feet. The world became white noise and darkness, and the kind of isolation that made you understand how easy it would be to die out here without anyone knowing until spring thaw revealed your frozen corpse. Through the canvas entrance, Kira could see thermal signatures moving, organized, deliberate, converging from 3 directions with the patience of professionals who knew that rushing got you killed and patience got you promoted. 72 operators against 18 Marines. The numbers didn't work, not even close. Not unless something impossible intervened. The memory came uninvited, the way memories of the dead always did. Syria, October 2017, 7 years ago, but feeling like yesterday when the wind screamed just right. The Raqqa rooftop had been 114 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade, except there wasn't any shade. Just sun and sand and heat that cooked rational thought out of your skull if you let it. The kind of environment where mistakes happen because your brain literally started to overheat, where discipline was the only thing standing between professional execution and catastrophic failure. Elena Reeves had been 24 years old and already a legend in circles that didn't officially exist. Angel 6. The call sign earned through 4 deployments and 189 confirmed eliminations. The ghost who killed from distances that made grown men check the sky for drones, for helicopters, for anything except the truth that one woman with a rifle could reach out past half a mile and end you before the sound arrived. She'd been prone on the rooftop for 3 hours, perfectly still, becoming part of the architecture. The Macmillan TAC-50 had been an extension of her body by then, as familiar as her own heartbeat. More familiar, maybe, because hearts change rhythm under stress, but good rifles never did. 1,180 meters to target, the ISIS commander stood in a courtyard below, radio pressed to his ear, coordinating attacks that would kill hundreds if he lived another hour. Through the scope, everything shimmered in heat waves that turned distance into liquid mathematics. Angel 6, abort mission. The voice had crackled sharp in her earpiece. Sandstorm incoming, visibility 0 in 90 seconds. I repeat, abort. She hadn't moved, hadn't responded. Her breathing had already slowed to the rhythm she'd trained 6 years to perfect. Heartbeat settling at 48 beats per minute. The world narrowing to crosshairs, target, wind. Nothing else existed. Nothing else mattered. Her spotter lay 3 feet to her left. Jackson Reed, 24 years old, Montana ranch kid who could read desert wind better than meteorologists with satellites. Hair the color of sun-bleached wheat, eyes the blue of high mountain lakes, face that belonged on a recruitment poster if recruitment posters told the truth about what the job actually cost. He didn't question her silence, had seen her make shots that shouldn't exist in physics textbooks, much less reality. Had learned that when Elena Reeves went still like that, became absent in a way that was more than just motionless, you shut up and let the professional work. The wind shifted. 17 knots from the east, gusting to 23. Temperature 114 Fahrenheit, humidity 11%. Her mind calculated bullet drop, wind drift, Coriolis effect at this latitude. Numbers becoming instinct, becoming absolute certainty. She exhaled halfway and held it. The world stopped breathing with her. The trigger broke clean. Sharp. Perfect. 2.9 seconds of flight time. The .50 caliber round crossed a quarter mile of superheated air, threading through wind that would have pushed lesser shots 4 feet off target. Through the scope, she watched the ISIS commander's radio tumble from his hand, watched him crumple like discarded paper, watched his bodyguards scatter like startled birds, searching for a threat they'd never see, never understand, never survive. Target eliminated. Jackson's voice was tight with awe he'd never quite lost, even after 2 years working with her. Jesus Christ, Elena, in this wind, at this distance, that's impossible. Impossible is just math nobody bothered learning. She worked the bolt, smooth, practiced, already scanning for secondary threats. The sandstorm hit 30 seconds later. The world turned brown and howling. Zero visibility. Breathing became an act of faith. They extracted under conditions that grounded helicopters, Jackson guiding her by touch through streets she'd memorized from satellite photos 3 days prior. The team made exfil point with 4 minutes to spare. That had been elimination number 189. That had been when Elena Reeves was still Elena Reeves, when Angel 6 was still just a call sign, not a legend that would force her into hiding. Not yet. 2 months later, everything changed. Different city, same war, same heat, different mission that was supposed to be simple. 6 Marines, rooftop observation post, 48 hours of watching and recording and reporting. No engagement unless compromised. By the book intelligence gathering. Hour 37, they were compromised. Elena saw it first. Thermal signatures moving wrong. Too organized, too deliberate. Converging on their building from 3 directions, with the kind of coordination that separated professional military from amateur militia. Jackson, we've got company, 30+ hostiles, 3 minutes out. He keyed the radio, called for extraction, got static. Tried again, more static. The kind that meant someone was jamming deliberately. That meant this wasn't random. That meant they were in trouble so deep that math stopped mattering, and only speed and violence and luck would get them out. Comms are jammed. His voice stayed level, but his eyes told the truth. They were alone, surrounded. 30 enemy fighters versus 6 Marines on a rooftop with limited ammunition and no support coming. The math didn't work. Get everyone to the north stairwell, Elena said. I'll buy time. Elena. That's an order, Corporal. Move them now. She'd made staff sergeant 2 weeks prior, still wasn't used to giving orders instead of taking them. But Jackson moved, got the other 4 Marines positioned for fighting retreat, while Elena set up on the southern parapet. 400 meters to the nearest enemy position. Urban environment, civilians still in the area, restricted rules of engagement. She could only shoot confirmed combatants with weapons visible. She counted 12 qualifying targets in the first sweep, started working through them with mechanical precision. 1 shot, 1 kill, reposition. Another shot, another kill, reposition. The rhythm of professional violence. The kind you could do in your sleep after enough practice. The kind that left you empty inside because feeling something would slow you down, and getting slow got people killed. The enemy adapted faster than expected, returned suppressive fire with the kind of volume that said they had ammunition to waste and the discipline to use it effectively. The rooftop became a storm of concrete chips and ricochets, the air filled with the crack and snap of rounds passing close enough to feel the displacement. Jackson appeared beside her, ignoring her orders the way good Marines sometimes did when orders conflicted with loyalty. Everyone's at the stairwell. Extraction ETA 20 minutes. We need to move. Negative. They've got the stairwell bracketed. We move now, we die in the funnel. We stay here, we die on this roof. He wasn't wrong. Her ammunition wouldn't last 20 minutes against 30 fighters who'd figured out where she was, who were smart enough to flank, disciplined enough to press despite casualties. She made the call, the one that would change everything. We jump. Jackson stared. What? North side, 3-story drop. There's an alley. We jump, we run. We link up with the others. We extract. Elena, that's a 40-foot fall onto concrete. We'll shatter every bone in our legs. Maybe, or maybe we die here. Definitely. She met his eyes, Montana blue, wide with understanding of what she was proposing, with the calculation of someone doing the same terrible math and arriving at the same conclusion. Your call, brother, but I'm jumping in 30 seconds either way. He checked the drop, checked the enemy advancing, did the math she had, made peace with it the way you had to when all the choices were bad and you just picked the least fatal. You're absolutely insane. He smiled, grim, ready, resigned. Let's go. They ran north, vaulted the parapet together. 3 stories of empty air, wind resistance, gravity doing what gravity always did with falling objects. Elena hit first, tried to roll, failed. Both legs buckled wrong, bones breaking with sounds like gunshots, like the world ending, like everything she was shattering on impact. Pain hit like lightning through her entire nervous system, white hot and absolute. She collapsed, screaming, despite training that said you stayed quiet, despite discipline that said you controlled the pain instead of letting it control you. Jackson landed beside her, tumbled better, combat roll still working even after 40 feet of freefall. He got up, reached for her. Can you walk? She tried. Her left leg bent at an angle legs weren't designed to bend. She went down hard, the second impact somehow worse than the first, because now she knew what breaking felt like, and her body was already screaming. Above them, enemy fighters appeared at the rooftop edge, weapons raising, muzzles tracking downward to where 2 Americans lay broken in an alley that would become their grave unless something changed in the next 5 seconds. Leave me. Elena gasped through pain that made breathing difficult. Get to the others. Fuck that. Jackson grabbed her, started dragging. The first burst of gunfire caught him across the back. Body armor stopped most of it, ceramic plates doing their job, distributing force across surface area instead of letting it punch through. But one round found the gap. Always one round finding the gap between plates, the space where armor couldn't cover because humans needed to move, and movement required flexibility, and flexibility meant vulnerability. The bullet punched through his lower spine, tumbled, fragmented, destroyed everything soft and necessary in its path. He went down, tried to get up, couldn't. His legs weren't responding, wouldn't respond, would never respond again because that's what severed spinal cords did to people who still had so much living left to do. No, 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 no. Elena crawled to him, both legs destroyed, Jackson bleeding, enemy fighters rappelling down the building 30 seconds until they were overrun. Jackson coughed blood. The bad kind, the kind that meant internal damage, the kind that meant minutes, not hours. He looked at her with eyes going dim, with understanding of what was happening, and acceptance that came too easy for someone 24 years old. Don't. Another cough, more blood. Don't let me be the last one you couldn't save. Promise me, Angel. Promise. I promise, Jackson. I swear to God, I promise. He died before she finished. 24 years old. Montana ranch kid who read wind like poetry, who'd saved her life a dozen times, who deserved decades more and got seconds instead. Gone. The enemy was 10 seconds out. Elena had a sidearm, 15 rounds, 30 targets. She made 7 count, dropping 7 before the slide locked back empty. Then she waited for the end, for the justice that said you didn't get to survive when your spotter died saving you. It came as helicopter gunfire, the extraction team arriving late, weapons hot, turning the alley into hell for anyone not friendly. They pulled her out, pulled Jackson's body out, pulled the other 4 Marines out alive. Mission rated as success. High casualty rate, but acceptable losses. Acceptable. As if Jackson was a number. As if his last words didn't haunt every breath she took afterward. As if promises made in blood-soaked alleys didn't bind you for the rest of your life. Walter Reed Medical Center, Bethesda. 6 surgeries over 4 months. Compound fractures, both tibias, shattered left fibula, severed ligaments, nerve damage that made doctors shake their heads and talk about medical retirement with a careful euphemism that meant your career was over, and everyone knew it, but nobody wanted to say it directly. Colonel Frank Harlow visited on day 47. He'd trained her, believed in her when she was just another recruit who couldn't hit targets past 200 meters. Turned her from Montana girl into Angel, 6, through patience and discipline, and the kind of instruction that broke you down, then built you back stronger. He sat beside her bed, 68 years old but straight back still, eyes that had watched the world burn in 3 different wars, and still found reasons to protect it. Navy Cross, Silver Star, Purple Heart with 3 clusters, Bronze Star with Valor device. He'd earned all of them before most of these Marines were born. Chechen warlord Khalid Basayev put 6 million on your head. Confirmed kill of his brother in Aleppo last year. Serbian intelligence network added 4 million more. You eliminated their top operative, Anja Volkova, in Belgrade, 2016. There are 12 separate bounties from 8 countries, Elena. Total value, $10 million for Angel 6. Dead. Proof required. She stared at the ceiling, counting acoustic tiles because focusing on something other than the pain helps sometimes. 47 tiles across, 32 down. 1,504 total if you counted the partials along the edges. I'm done anyway. Legs are destroyed. Can't run, can't deploy. I'm useless. You're alive. That's not useless. That's opportunity. For what? Harlow leaned forward, voice dropping to the register he used when saying things that couldn't be official, couldn't be recorded, couldn't exist anywhere except in the space between 2 people who trusted each other absolutely. We stage a training accident, closed casket funeral, full honors. Angel 6 dies a hero. Elena Reeves gets buried with classified records sealed. And you get a new name, new identity, new life where nobody's trying to kill you. Doing what? I'm a sniper who can't walk. You're a combat medic who saved lives in 4 war zones. We retrain you. Nurse practitioner, forward deployment, medical support. You keep serving, just differently. She thought about Jackson, about his last words, about promises made in alleys while people bled out in your arms, about the difference between taking lives and saving them, about whether changing from one to the other could ever balance the scales. If I do this, if I become someone else, I want to save lives, not take them. No more killing, just healing. Deal. They buried Elena Reeves in 2019. Arlington National Cemetery, Marine Honor Guard, 21 gun salute, the works. The coffin held sandbags in a dress uniform because the woman it was meant for stood watching from a distance. Civilian clothes, leaning on a cane she'd need for the rest of her life. Or so everyone would believe. Kira Ashford was born that day. Same woman, different name, permanent limp from injuries that had healed perfectly. 5 years of committed performance art. 5 years of playing broken so convincingly that doctors believed the lie, that x-rays she'd carefully doctored showed damage that didn't exist, that the world accepted a crippled nurse and never suspected the weapon hiding underneath. 5 years of saving lives instead of ending them. 5 years of peace she'd fought harder for than any battle. 5 years until Montana changed everything. January 2024. The Absaroka Mountains rose like broken teeth against a sky the color of old bone. Temperature hovering at -8 Fahrenheit before wind chill. The kind of cold that turned exposed skin necrotic in minutes, froze rifle oil solid, made breathing feel like swallowing razors. The CH-47 Chinook's rotors beat winter air into submission as it descended toward the landing zone. Inside, 18 Marines sat in jump seats, faces set with the particular tension of men heading somewhere they might not leave. Full combat loads, winter warfare gear, the quiet that settles over professionals before potential violence. And one woman who didn't belong. Kira Ashford sat in the corner, medical kit between her boots, left leg extended at the awkward angle she'd perfected through obsessive practice. 31 years old, but looking older in the cargo bay's harsh light. Angular features that winter made sharper. Pale gray eyes that reflected light without warmth. Hair pulled back tight enough to hurt, tight enough to remind her this was real. This was now. This was the life she'd chosen. The Marines pretended not to stare. Most failed. They sent us a cripple? Private Marcus Webb, 22 years old, hadn't learned to whisper properly yet. Sound carried differently in the helicopter's metal belly. Every word found ears whether you wanted them to or not. Kira didn't react. She'd learned not to. Learned to make herself small, forgettable, beneath notice. Learned to limp so convincingly that even orthopedic surgeons believed the injury was real when they examined X-rays that showed damage carefully inserted into images that were otherwise legitimate. 5 years of being invisible. 5 years of being exactly what people expected to see. The skills that made her Angel 6 hadn't disappeared. They just found different applications. The helicopter touched down hard. Snow erupted in blinding clouds. The ramp dropped and cold rushed in like a physical assault, like getting punched in the chest by winter itself. Move! 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 The loadmaster's voice cut through rotor wash. Marines flowed out in practice formation, muscle memory taking over when conscious thought would be too slow. Kira stood slowly, favoring her left leg, gripping the overhead rail for support that was entirely theatrical. She made it 3 steps before Hayes brushed past, impatient with her slowness, making it clear without words that she was an impediment in his world. She stumbled deliberately, caught herself, limped down the ramp into the worst cold she'd felt since the lie began. The forward operating base was barely worthy of the name. Prefab structures half buried in snow, fighting positions dug into frozen earth that resisted shovels like concrete, camouflage netting strung between scraggly pines that looked dead even in summer. This was the kind of place that didn't exist on maps politicians saw, the kind of place men died without headlines. Captain Reed Blackwell stood near the command tent, watching his unit assemble. 42 years old, career infantry, face like weathered granite, eyes that missed nothing and forgot less. He'd led men through Fallujah and Helmand and a dozen places that taught you which people could be trusted when the lights went out. His eyes found Kira, stayed there, not with appreciation, but with the calculation of a man adding weight to a scale already tipping wrong. She limped toward him through ankle-deep powder, medical kit heavy, making sure every step showed weakness, vulnerability, exactly what they expected to see. Captain Blackwell, nurse practitioner Ashford reporting as assigned, sir. He didn't salute. This wasn't that kind of operation. Just studied her like a problem he hadn't solved yet, and didn't particularly want to. You're the medical support they sent, not a question, an accusation wearing questions clothing. Yes, sir. That leg? Combat injury? Kira had the story memorized, had told it 60 times without variation. The consistency that made lies believable, that turned fiction into accepted fact through sheer repetition. Training accident, sir. Compound fracture, extensive nerve damage. Retrained as medical personnel afterward. Can you run? No, sir. Can you carry a combat load over distance? No, sir. Then what exactly can you do for me out here, Ashford? Each word precise, clipped. The voice of a man who'd lost soldiers because of weak links in the chain, who'd made decisions about who lived and died, and carried that weight without complaint, but also without patience for anything that made those decisions harder. She met his eyes, kept her voice level, professional, empty of the pride that would have answered differently. Keep your Marines alive, sir. That's what I do. That's all I do. Blackwell's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. We're 8 hours from nearest surgical support, 12 from anything resembling a real hospital. If things go sideways, you're all that stands between my Marines and bleeding out in snow that'll preserve their bodies until spring thaw. Can you handle that? Yes, sir, I understand. And if we take contact, you can't move fast enough to stay with the unit during displacement. No, sir, I cannot. He nodded slowly, turned to Hayes, standing nearby. Hayes, get her set up in the medical bunker. When contact initiates, and it will, she stays there. Understood? We cannot spare combat personnel protecting someone who can't keep pace. Hayes gestured for Kira to follow, voice dropping when they were out of Blackwell's earshot. Don't take it personal, ma'am. Captain's just thinking tactically. Bodies that can't move are liabilities in mobile warfare. I understand completely, Sergeant. He grunted, didn't believe her but didn't care enough to press. Led her to a reinforced dugout near the command post, sandbags stacked shoulder high, timber supports, barely room for 3 people, and the medical supplies already stacked inside. This is you. During any engagement you stay here. Captain's orders, direct and non-negotiable. Kira nodded, set down her kit, took in the space with eyes that calculated fields of fire, escape routes, structural integrity automatically. Habits that never died, just learned to hide better. Kira stood alone in the bunker, unpacked her medical kit with practiced efficiency, organized supplies by what she'd need first in mass casualty situations. Morphine, pressure bandages, surgical clamps, hemostatic agents, quick clot, chest seals, the tools of her chosen trade now, saving instead of ending, building instead of destroying. But beneath the medical supplies, in a compartment she'd built herself, hidden by a false bottom that would fool any standard inspection, lay the pieces of who she used to be. Macmillan TAC 50, disassembled, each component wrapped in treated cloth. The rifle had traveled with her through 4 deployments, 7 countries, 189 confirmed eliminations. It had been hidden for 5 years in medical equipment, X-rayed by security personnel who never looked deep enough, never asked the right questions. You didn't stop being what you were. You just got better at pretending you'd forgotten. She didn't touch the components. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if luck held. If circumstances stayed simple. If promises made to dead men didn't come due in snow, in darkness, in impossible odds. Outside, full dark came at 1847 hours. The temperature dropped to -21. The kind of cold where breath froze in beards, where rifle actions got sluggish, where exposed skin turned black in minutes, where the world became actively hostile to human life. The Marines rotated watch, 2 hours on, 4 off, trying to stay warm, trying to stay alert, trying not to think about how far they were from support if something went wrong. Kira sat in her bunker, supposedly resting. Instead, she'd opened a small notebook, began logging observations with the precision that had made her legendary in circles that no longer knew she existed. 1720 hours. Wind shift 15 degrees more easterly. Barometric pressure dropping. Major storm system incoming, larger than weather forecast predicted. 1805 hours. Diesel exhaust detected, faint, northeast bearing. Non-U.S. equipment signature. Possibly vehicles 800 to 900 meters out, using terrain to mask approach and engine noise. 1823 hours. Artillery fire distant, bearing consistent with known training areas across Canadian border. Russian pattern suggests ranging fire, Textbook bracketing technique for indirect fire missions. She wrote it all down. Every detail, the patterns no one else was trained to see, the threat indicators that separated professional military operations from amateur militia, the signs that said this wasn't training anymore, if it ever had been. Her hand moved to the false bottom of her medical kit, pressed the hidden release. The compartment opened silently, revealing Macmillan components that gleamed dully in chemical light. She stared at them for a long moment. 5 years of peace, 340 lives saved. The balance sheet that said she was more than a weapon, more than Angel 6, more than 189 confirmed eliminations. Then closed the compartment without touching anything, sealed it, covered it with bandages and emergency supplies, and the fiction that she was just a nurse, just broken, just trying to help. Not yet, maybe never. She'd made a promise to herself. Elena Reeves had taken enough lives. Kira Ashford saved them. That was the balance. That was the penance. That was the only path to something resembling peace. But promises were fragile things in the cold and dark. And some debts came due whether you were ready or not. Outside, the storm picked up. Snow fell harder. Temperature dropped another degree. The Absorica Mountains had no mercy for the unprepared, no patience for weakness, no forgiveness for mistakes. Night was coming, and with it, something worse than weather. Something that would test whether 5 years of hiding had been enough, whether Kira Ashford could stay buried, whether Angel 6 could remain dead. The answer would be written in blood and snow, and impossible shots through a blizzard that should have made killing at distance a fantasy. But first, there was the waiting, the preparation, the slow build of tension that every combat veteran recognized, the calm before angels fell from grace and rose from hiding. 8 kilometers northwest of the forward operating base, Dmitry Volkov stood in snow that reached his knees and studied the thermal imaging display with the patience of a man who'd learned that rushing got you killed and waiting got you promoted. 43 years old, face carved by Afghan wind and Chechen cold into something that looked like it belonged on ancient coins. Eyes the color of frozen water, pale blue and empty of warmth or mercy, or anything that might suggest he still remembered what it felt like to be fully human. Around him, 72 Spetsnaz operators moved through the blizzard like wolves closing on wounded prey. Professional spacing, tactical discipline, the kind of coordination that came from years of training in places where mistakes meant body bags and success meant medals nobody would ever see. They wore winter camouflage that made them invisible against snow, carried weapons that cost more than most Americans made in a year, operated with the absolute certainty that they were the apex predators in this particular food chain. The intelligence officer approached, tablet protected from snow inside a waterproof case, thermal data scrolling across the screen in green and black patterns that told stories if you knew how to read them. Commander Volkov, target assessment complete. 18 American Marines, defensive positions, standard winter warfare protocols, no air support due to storm conditions. Quick reaction force delayed minimum 6 hours. He paused, scrolled through additional data. One anomaly. What anomaly? Female heat signature, medical bunker, minimal movement, matches description of... The officer's voice changed, became uncertain in a way that professional soldiers didn't like showing their commanders. No, impossible. She died in 2019. Confirmed funeral, Arlington Cemetery. Volkov's hands shot out, grabbed the tablet, stared at the thermal image. A single figure, stationary, alone in a bunker designed for medical support. The heat signature showed someone small, compact, moving with the careful limitation of injury. Someone who shouldn't be a threat, who couldn't be a threat, who was officially dead and buried 3,000 miles away. But Dmitry Volkov hadn't survived 23 years of special operations by believing in coincidence or accepting official stories at face value. He'd learned that the most dangerous enemies were the ones everyone thought were dead. that the best operators were the ones who could disappear completely, that sometimes ghosts were real and they killed you before you even knew they were there. He pulled a photograph from inside his jacket, protected in plastic, edges worn from being handled too many times over too many years. The woman in the photo was younger, harder, staring at the camera with eyes that suggested she was calculating the exact distance for a headshot, even while posing for identification purposes. Dark hair pulled back tight, angular features, the kind of face that wouldn't stand out in a crowd, but somehow became unforgettable once you'd seen what it looked like through a rifle scope. Elena Reeves, Angel, 6. 189 confirmed eliminations. The most lethal sniper the United States Marine Corps had ever produced. The woman who'd killed his sister in Belgrade 8 years ago and destroyed everything Dmitri had spent his life protecting. Anya, he whispered to the photograph, to the ghost, to the memory that drove him more than duty or honor or patriotism ever could. If there is even 1% chance she's alive, I will know, and I will have justice. His second-in-command appeared beside him, silent as falling snow. Mikhail Sokolov, 38, scarred hands and flat eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything anymore. Orders, Commander? Volkov studied the thermal display again, compared it to the photograph, made calculations that went beyond simple mathematics into the realm of instinct and experience, and the kind of knowledge you accumulated after 2 decades of hunting people who didn't want to be found. Standard assault pattern, 3-pronged approach, converge on command post, eliminate resistance, secure the base. He paused, finger tracing the medical bunker location on the display. But I take personal command of Assault Team Alpha. We sweep the medical position first. Commander, that's support personnel, minimal threat. Shouldn't we focus on... She killed Anya. Volkov's voice went flat, dead, the tone that made subordinates shut up and follow orders without question. Belgrade, 2016. Serbian intelligence network. Anya was coordinating Eastern operations. One shot, 800 meters, through a sandstorm that should have made shooting impossible. My sister died before the sound arrived, before she even knew death was coming. He looked at Sokolov with eyes that had stopped pretending to be sane somewhere between Grozny and Aleppo. If Angel 6 is alive, if she's in that bunker, if there's any chance the Americans faked her death to protect their asset, then this isn't a training interdiction anymore. This is personal. This is family. This is the debt that matters more than mission parameters or operational objectives or anything except blood calling for blood. Sokolov nodded slowly, understanding the math that went beyond tactics into territory where rational military planning stopped and human vengeance took over. And if it's not her, if it's just a crippled nurse like the intelligence suggests, then she dies quickly and we move on. But if it is her, Volkov smiled, showed teeth, looked like something that had crawled out of frozen ground and forgotten how to be human. Then she dies slowly, and she knows exactly why. And the last thing she hears before darkness is Anya's name. He checked his watch. 1900 hours. Full dark, storm intensifying, visibility dropping to 0. Perfect conditions for professionals who knew how to use weather as a weapon, who understood that nature killed more soldiers than bullets ever did, who could move through blizzards like they were born in ice and raised in snow. All teams, commence assault in 30 minutes, radio silence until contact, weapons free on all targets, no prisoners, no survivors, no evidence. We were never here. Understood? 72 affirmatives crackled through encrypted communications. 72 operators who'd done this before in Syria and Ukraine and a dozen other places that didn't officially exist, who knew their jobs and did them with mechanical efficiency, regardless of whether the targets were combatants or civilians or anyone unlucky enough to be in the wrong place when Russia decided to send a message. Volkov stared at the photograph one more time, at Anya's face frozen in time 8 years ago, before Elena Reeves had ended her future with one impossible shot. Then he put it away, checked his weapon, became the thing he'd trained his entire adult life to be, a hunter. And somewhere in the storm, 8 kilometers away, his prey waited in a bunker and pretended to be broken while carrying secrets that would get everyone around her killed if the wrong people discovered the truth. The storm swallowed them as they moved forward. White ghosts in white snow, invisible and patient and absolutely lethal. Inside the forward operating base, Kira moved through marine positions with her exaggerated limp, checking individual trauma kits with the obsessive attention to detail that separated competent medical personnel from excellent ones. Each Marine got the same treatment, the same careful inspection, the same quiet suggestions about organizing supplies for access with cold-numbed fingers. Corporal Liam Sheffield was 24, Montana native, the kind of hard-edged young man the mountains produced like stones. Reminded her too much of Jackson, same sun-bleached hair and blue eyes, and the confidence that came from growing up in places where mistakes killed you and competence kept you breathing. He sat in his fighting position checking his M4 for the 3rd time, breath clouding white, when Kira approached. "Mind if I check your individual trauma kit, Corporal?" He glanced up, shrugged with the casual dismissal of someone who thought he was too young to die and too well trained to need a crippled nurse's help. "Sure, ma'am, but I know my medical gear. Been through it twice already." She knelt beside him, awkward with the theatrical limp, opened his IFAC. It was well organized. He'd been trained properly, but she repacked it anyway. Adjusted items to be even more accessible with cold-numbed fingers. Made sure the tourniquet would deploy one-handed. Positioned the quick clot where he could reach it if his dominant hand was compromised. "You've been deployed before." Not a question, an observation based on how his hands moved when he thought nobody was watching. The unconscious efficiency that came from doing things under stress until they became automatic. Iraq, 2 rotations, Ramadi and Fallujah. He paused, studied her with more attention than he'd shown before. "Training accidents don't earn you deployment ribbons, ma'am. Where'd you serve?" The lie came easy now, automatic like breathing, smooth from 5 years of repetition until fiction and truth blurred into something that felt real, even to her. Stateside training facilities mostly, extensive simulation work. He nodded, but he watched her hands as she worked. Noted the efficiency, the way her fingers never fumbled or hesitated or second-guessed. The kind of muscle memory that came from doing emergency trauma care 1,000 times under pressure, not from classroom instruction or simulation exercises. "That's good work, ma'am. You move like you've done this in the field before. Under fire." She handed back his kit, careful not to let the compliment show on her face. "Try very hard not to need it tonight, Sheffield. That's always the plan." He smiled, young and confident, and immortal in the way only men who hadn't been seriously hurt yet could be. "Never works out that way, though, does it?" "Sometimes it does. Sometimes you get lucky." She stood, wincing as her supposedly bad leg took weight. The leg that worked perfectly, that she'd spent 5 years pretending was crippled, that had become such a practiced performance, she sometimes forgot it was theater. "Make tonight one of the lucky times, Corporal." "Yes, ma'am." At the eastern perimeter, she found Private Owen Garrett, 22 years old, youngest Marine in the unit. He was looking at his phone at a photo that made him smile and hurt at the same time. The expression of someone whose heart lives somewhere else, while his body occupied frozen ground in Montana. "Family?" Kira asked gently. He showed her without hesitation, pride overcoming privacy. The photo showed a newborn baby, impossibly small, wrapped in pink blankets that made her look even tinier. 3 weeks old, according to the date stamp, born January 2nd, while her father was 3,000 miles away pretending this was just training. Sophia Elizabeth Garrett. I haven't met her yet, haven't held her. His voice cracked slightly, young man trying to sound tough, while his eyes said he was terrified he'd never get the chance. Something cracked in Kira's chest. The coincidence of timing. The reminder that these weren't just Marines preparing for potential combat. They were fathers, and sons, and husbands. Futures waiting to happen. Lives that stretched forward into decades of possibility if they survived the next 6 hours. She's beautiful. You'll hold her soon, Owen. I promise you that. He looked at her, really looked, searching for reassurance from someone who might actually know instead of just hoping. You think? We're pretty far out here, pretty isolated. If something happens, you'll go home to her, I promise. The words came out harder than she intended, carrying weight that turned promise into certainty, into something that sounded less like comfort and more like sworn oath. How can you promise something like that, man? Because I'm Angel 6, and I've never broken a promise to someone I swore to protect. Because I'll kill everyone between you and home if that's what it takes. Because that's what Jackson's last words meant. And I won't let another 22-year-old die when I could have saved him. Because that's what medical personnel do, she said instead, voice controlled again, professional. We keep promises. We bring people home. That's the job. He wanted to believe she could see it, put his phone away, checked his weapon, got ready for a night that might never let him hold his daughter, that might make Sophia grow up with only photographs to remember the father she never knew. Kira limped away carrying weight she couldn't share, knowing that if things went wrong, if circumstances forced her hand, she'd break every rule she'd lived by for 5 years to keep that promise. Jackson's last words echoed in the space between heartbeats. Don't let me be the last one you couldn't save. She wouldn't. Whatever the cost, whatever it took, Owen Garrett would hold his daughter. The second Chinook arrived at 1930 hours. Kira heard it before she saw it. That distinctive beat of tandem rotors announcing something important incoming. She emerged from the bunker, limping through ankle-deep powder, watched it land with the interest of someone who'd learned to read situations through the smallest details. One man stepped off, just one. That alone told you he mattered. Told you this wasn't standard operating procedure. Told you something had changed in the calculus of what was supposed to be a simple training evolution. Colonel Frank Harlow was 68 years old and looked like he'd been carved from the same mountains that surrounded them. Tall, straight-backed despite the years, eyes that had watched the world burn in 3 different wars and still found reasons to protect it. Navy Cross, Silver Star, Purple Heart with 3 clusters, Bronze Star with Valor device. He wore them all on his chest like accusations against easier men who'd never tested themselves against the same fire. Captain Blackwell moved to greet him, clearly caught off guard by unannounced senior officer arrival in the middle of what was supposed to be routine cold weather training. Colonel Harlow, sir, we weren't informed you'd be joining this operation. Harlow's voice carried the rasp of a man who'd breathed too much smoke, swallowed too much sand, shouted too many orders that saved lives and ended them. Last-minute decision, Captain. I'm here to observe your unit's readiness in adverse environmental conditions. This is still classified as a training operation, correct? Yes, sir. Readiness evaluation in extreme environment, defensive position sustainment, cold weather combat protocols. Outstanding. Carry on as if I'm not here. Harlow's eyes scanned the perimeter with automatic precision, checking fields of fire, evaluating overlapping coverage, noting dead ground where attackers could approach unseen. The instincts never died, never faded, never stopped calculating threat vectors, even when you were supposed to be retired from the business of keeping people alive through superior violence. Then his gaze found Kira standing near the medical bunker, and for just a fraction of a second, something passed between them. Recognition, acknowledgement, the kind of silent communication between 2 people who'd stood together in places that didn't exist, done things that never happened, buried truths that would never surface. Then it was gone. Professional distance reimposed, the mask settling back into place. Harlow turned back to Blackwell, gestured toward where Kira stood. Your medical support, that's her? Nurse practitioner Ashford, yes, sir. Recently assigned. The one with the mobility limitation. Yes, sir. Training accident, significant nerve damage. She's limited to stationary medical support. Harlow nodded slowly, face giving nothing away, voice carrying just the right tone of professional assessment without personal interest. Unfortunate. Still, medical expertise matters considerably more than mobility in a defensive position. Can't run and shoot simultaneously anyway. Blackwell didn't look convinced, mouth tightening in the way of commanders who'd accepted decisions they disagreed with but couldn't override. With respect, sir, if we take contact and need to displace under fire, she becomes a liability we'll need to protect or abandon. Neither option is acceptable in my tactical assessment. Then I suggest you hold your position, Captain. Harlow's tone left no room for argument, the voice of a man who'd commanded in situations where positions were held or everyone died, where retreat meant massacre and standing meant maybe surviving if you were good enough and lucky enough and willing to pay whatever price the moment demanded. Blackwell assigned him quarters in the command structure. The two officers walked toward the tent, discussing defensive preparations, communication protocols, rules of engagement for what was supposedly just training, but felt increasingly like something that would be written in blood before morning came. Kira watched them go, waited until they were completely out of sight, swallowed by snow and distance, and the curtain of white that made the world end 20 feet from where you stood. Then she limped back into her bunker, closed the canvas flap, allowed herself one moment of genuine emotion that would have destroyed the performance if anyone had seen it. Frank Harlow was here, her instructor from what felt like several lifetimes ago, the man who'd taught her to shoot before she was old enough to vote, who'd believed in her when she was just another recruit who couldn't hit targets past 200 meters, who'd held her hand in the hospital after Syria when morphine wasn't enough to stop the screaming, and Jackson's last words played on endless loop inside her skull. The man who'd helped her die and be reborn, who'd created Kira Ashford from Elena Reeves's ashes and buried the legend deep enough that $10 million in bounties couldn't find it. He was here to protect her, which meant something bad was coming. Something that might force her hand, that might require Angel 6 to wake up one more time, that might shatter 5 years of careful peace with 6 hours of necessary violence. 2,000 hours. Storm intensifying, visibility dropping to 15 feet, temperature bottoming out at -24. The kind of cold that stopped being weather and became active malice, became an enemy that killed as efficiently as bullets, but slower and with more suffering along the way. Hayes appeared at her bunker entrance without announcement, materializing from snow like a ghost taking solid form. "Ma'am, Captain wants to see you. Command post, now." She followed him through the blizzard, fighting to maintain the limp, when every instinct screamed to move faster, to stop pretending, to acknowledge the urgency in how Hayes moved. Inside the command post, Blackwell stood over a tactical map with Harlow beside him, both faces grim with the look of men who just received information that changed everything. Ashford, good. Blackwell didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We've received updated intelligence. This is no longer a training evolution. Russian intercepts 6 hours ago, encrypted communications, Spetsnaz assault team, 72 operators inbound on our position." The words hung in the air like smoke, like poison, like the kind of truth that made your stomach drop because you knew what came next and there was nothing you could do to stop it. 72 against 18. She kept her voice steady, professional, but her mind was already doing the mathematics, the terrible, simple calculations that said this equation didn't have a solution that left everyone breathing. Quick reaction force is weathered in at Lewis McChord. Storms too severe for flight operations. 6 hours minimum before they can launch, maybe 8 depending on conditions. Blackwell looked at her with eyes that had already accepted what was coming, had already made peace with odds that didn't work. "Your orders remain unchanged. When contact initiates, you stay in that bunker. Hide. Treat casualties as they're brought to you. Survive. If we're overrun, if position becomes untenable, we'll try to extract you, but I can't guarantee protection if we're fighting for our own lives. Understood? Yes, sir. Understood. Harlow spoke for the first time, voice carrying undertones only she would recognize, layers of meaning hidden in professional words. The bunker's reinforced, good overhead cover, positioned to survive even if perimeter falls. Medical personnel are non-combatants under Geneva Conventions. Even Spetsnaz respect those protocols usually. You should be safe if you stay hidden, stay quiet, stay out of the fight. His eyes met hers for just a second. Should be safe, not will be safe. Should, with all the uncertainty that word carried, with all the unspoken understanding that protocols meant nothing when professionals came to kill everyone and leave no witnesses. Dismissed, Ashford. Get back to your position. Prepare for mass casualties. Pray we get lucky tonight. She limped back through the storm, mind racing despite the careful slowness of her movements. 72 Spetsnaz operators, professional assault team, Russian special forces, the kind of people who'd done this before in places where rules didn't exist, and victory was measured in body count rather than territory held. Back in her bunker, alone, she opened her medical kit, stared at the false bottom for a long time, finger hovering over the hidden release that would open the compartment and turn her back into what she'd been before Kira Ashford existed. Harlow appeared at the entrance 15 minutes later. No announcement, just suddenly there the way old soldiers learn to move. Quiet and careful, and ready for violence even when appearing relaxed. Kira, using her real name, not the fiction, the name nobody had spoken aloud in 5 years except in darkness and privacy, and moments when truth mattered more than safety. She didn't respond immediately. Hadn't heard that name spoken by anyone except herself in so long, it sounded foreign, like something from another life, like hearing a ghost call you by your true name instead of the mask you wore. They're coming, Harlow continued quietly, voice pitched below the range of any listening devices, below the wind, into the space where only two people who trusted each other absolutely could hear. Russian intercept confirmed it 12 hours ago. Dmitry Volkov, Spetsnaz commander, 43 years old, 23 years special operations. His sister was Anya Volkova. Belgrade, 2016. You remember her? Memory came sharp and immediate. Serbian intelligence network coordinator, target elimination, 800 meters through a sandstorm that should have made shooting impossible. One shot, one kill, mission complete, 300 civilians saved from the bombings she'd been planning. Another number in the ledger, another life taken to protect lives that would never know they'd been saved. I remember. Dmitry knows, or suspects, this base was meant to be routine training, but Russian intelligence has been watching our deployment patterns for months. They knew we'd be here, isolated, vulnerable. This isn't about strategic objectives or territory or sending political messages. This is about him getting close enough to confirm whether Angel 6 is alive, close enough to have revenge for his sister, if you are. How long until they hit us? Harlow checked his watch, the old mechanical kind that didn't need batteries, that kept working through cold and shock and whatever else the world threw at it. Hour, maybe 90 minutes. They're using the storm, moving slow to avoid detection until they're in assault range. Professional approach, no mistakes, no rushing. They'll be on top of us before we see them coming. The terrible mathematics settled over her like snow, like weight, like the kind of burden that crushed you if you tried to carry it alone, but killed everyone around you if you didn't try. 18 Marines against 72 Spetsnaz operators, 6 hours until support arrived. Owen Garrett's 3-week-old daughter waiting to meet her father. Liam Sheffield, who reminded her too much of Jackson. Blackwell and Hayes, and all the others who'd come here thinking this was training, who trusted their government wouldn't abandon them, who deserved better than dying in snow because one woman's past caught up to her present. The numbers didn't work, not unless something impossible intervened. "You gave me direct orders," she said carefully, testing, wanting him to understand what she was asking without having to say it explicitly. "Stay in the bunker when contact happens. Hide. Non-negotiable." "I know what I said. And if I disobey those orders, if I do something that breaks cover, that exposes who I really am, that proves Angel 6 is alive to everyone hunting her?" Harlow was silent for a long moment, old man's face lined with decisions and consequences, and the weight of 40 years spent making choices that kept some people breathing while ending others. "Then every enemy you ever made will know within hours. The Chechens will triple the bounty. Serbian intelligence, everyone who wants you dead, will come hunting. The peaceful life ends permanently, Kira. No second chances, no more hiding. You'll spend whatever time you have left running from people who are very good at finding targets that don't want to be found. And if I stay hidden, if I follow orders, if I let these Marines fight without help, some of them die, maybe all of them. 18 against 72. Those numbers don't work even with superior training in defensive positions. But you survive, keep your cover, continue the life you built. Continue saving people instead of killing them. Continue being Kira Ashford, the nurse who keeps promises by staying out of fights she can't win." She thought about Owen's daughter, about Jackson bleeding out in her arms, about promises made in blood-soaked alleys that bound you forever if you let them, that defined you more than names or identities or anything except the choice between who you were and who you wanted to become. "How many do you think survive if I don't intervene?" Honestly, 4, maybe 6. If they're lucky and well-led and the Russians make mistakes, which they won't because Volkov's too experienced for that. "And if I do help? If Angel 6 comes back one more time?" Harlow met her eyes, old instructor looking at the weapon he'd forged, the student who'd surpassed every expectation, the legend who'd chosen peace over war, and might have to choose war one more time to protect the peace others took for granted. All 18 go home. Owen holds his daughter. Sheffield survives to tell stories. Blackwell makes major and commands a company. But you lose everything. The quiet life, the anonymity, the chance to be just Kira, saving lives in emergency rooms where nobody knows your past. All of it gone, burned away the moment you pull that trigger. That's not much of a choice, Frank. No, it's not, but it's the only one you have. He pulled something from his jacket, small device with a single red button, JSOC emergency beacon, the kind that would bring hell from above if activated, the kind that would also confirm Angel 6 was alive and active, and every intelligence service on the planet would know within the hour. If you do this, if you activate this beacon, if you break cover, there's no going back. Elena Reeves becomes real again. Every enemy you made will know. The peaceful life ends for good. She took the beacon, felt its weight, light as a grenade but heavy as the choice it represented. 5 years of peace balanced against 6 hours that would decide whether 18 men went home or died in snow that would preserve their bodies until someone cared enough to dig them out. Harlow put a hand on her shoulder, squeezed once, the gesture carrying everything words couldn't say. "Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. The weapon I trained became a healer. That's rare. That matters more you know." Then he was gone, back into the storm, back to wherever old warriors went when young ones prepared for choices that would define them. Kira stood alone at the bunker entrance, beacon in one hand, her fake limp keeping her anchored to the lies she'd lived for 5 years, the life she'd built from careful deception and harder truths. The math didn't work, not without intervention, not without something impossible. And somewhere in the dark and snow, 72 Russian operators moved closer, closing the noose, preparing to eliminate the Americans before anyone knew they'd ever been there. Dmitry Volkov had come for revenge, had come to confirm whether the woman who killed his sister was really dead or just hiding behind a new name and a fake limp in 5 years of lies. She limped back inside, closed the canvas flap, activated a single chemical light that turned everything sickly green. Then slowly, deliberately, she unwrapped the bandage on her left leg. The leg was perfect, muscular, undamaged, fully functional. Had never been broken, never been injured, never been anything except strong and capable, and exactly what a professional operator needed to move fast when movement meant survival. The limp was theater, 5 years of committed performance, the most important role she'd ever played. She flexed the leg, full range of motion, no pain, no limitation, never had been. Kira Ashford was the lie she'd told so well, she'd almost believed it herself. Elena Reeves had always been real, had just been sleeping, waiting, patient. She opened her medical kit, found the false bottom, pressed the hidden release that required knowing exactly where and how to push. The Macmillan TAC 50 lay in pieces, waiting, patient as death itself. Her hands moved without conscious thought, muscle memory from 1,000 repetitions. Barrel, receiver, scope, stock, bolt assembly, magazine well. 28 seconds from components to weapon. She could do it blindfolded, had done it in darker places than this. She loaded 15 rounds, 50 caliber BMG, custom loads, hand-selected brass, powder charges calculated for extreme cold. Every round perfect because anything less than perfect meant someone died who shouldn't. The rifle sat across her lap. Familiar weight, familiar balance, like greeting an old friend you'd hoped never to see again, while knowing that hope had always been fantasy. Outside, she heard Captain Blackwell's voice giving final orders before the storm made communication impossible. Ashford, when shooting starts, you stay in that bunker. You hide. That's a direct order. We cannot risk assets protecting you during contact. She looked at the canvas flap, at the storm beyond, at the invisible enemy moving through the dark, at the 18 Marines who trusted her to keep them alive through medicine, while never suspecting she could protect them through violence. Thought about Jackson bleeding out in her arms, about Syria, about 6 men who died because she couldn't protect them, about promises made in blood. Thought about Owen and his 3-week-old daughter he'd never held, about Liam Sheffield who reminded her too much of Jackson, about futures that would end unless someone impossible intervened. She activated the JSOC beacon. 3 clicks. Emergency authentication code that would reach NORAD in 90 seconds, that would scramble quick reaction force immediately, that would also tell every intelligence service monitoring those frequencies that Angel 6 was alive and active, and exactly where to find her. 6 hours minimum before help arrived. These Marines didn't have 6 hours. They had maybe 60 minutes before contact, maybe 30 minutes of fighting before they were overrun, maybe less if the Russians were better than good. But they had something the enemy didn't account for, couldn't account for, wouldn't believe was possible even after it happened. They had Angel 6. Elena stood. No limp now, just smooth, powerful movement. The body she'd hidden for 5 years finally allowed to be what it was. She pulled on white winter camouflage, loaded extra magazines, checked the scope one final time, then stopped, looked at the medical supplies around her, at the bandages and morphine and all the tools she'd used to save lives instead of end them, at the person she'd tried so hard to become. "I'm sorry, Jackson," she whispered to no one, to everyone, to the ghost of who she'd been and the person she'd hoped to stay. "I'm sorry I have to break the promise to keep the promise." Then she picked up the rifle and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit like a physical blow, wind screaming, snow horizontal, visibility maybe 40 feet in the chemical light scatter from base positions. Temperature had dropped to -24, cold enough to kill in minutes without proper gear, cold enough to make metal brittle, cold enough to change everything about how bullets flew. She moved through the Marine positions using terrain and darkness, none of them seeing her, too focused on external threats, too convinced the crippled nurse was safe in her bunker where she belonged. She found high ground, barely 4 feet of elevation, but in flat terrain, 4 feet was everything. Went prone in the snow, the cold soaking through her clothes instantly, starting the countdown to hypothermia, giving her maybe 20 minutes before it became critical, maybe 40 before it killed her. Long enough. Through the scope, the world became green, thermal imaging turning heat signatures into blooming targets against frozen landscape. And there, at 740 meters, a cluster of shapes moving with purpose, professional spacing, tactical discipline. The enemy had arrived, right on schedule. 72 operators who thought they were hitting an unprepared training unit, who thought this would be quick and clean and deniable. They were about to learn different. At the center of the formation, one figure stood slightly apart, radio antenna visible even through the snow, 4 bodyguards in close protection formation, textbook command element positioning. Dmitry Volkov, coming to confirm whether the woman who killed his sister was dead or alive, coming for revenge or closure, coming to end something that started in Belgrade 8 years ago with one impossible shot. Elena calculated wind, 19 knots gusting to 26, shifting east. Temperature -24, snow reducing visibility, bullet would drift right, drop would be significant, temperature would slow powder burn. All the factors that made this shot barely possible, that separated professional operators from legends, that defined the difference between Angel 6 and everyone else who claimed to be good at this. She made the adjustments. 3.5 mils right for wind, 8.3 mils elevation for drop in distance, temperature correction -0.4. Numbers becoming instinct, becoming certainty. The target raised his hand, giving orders, coordinating the assault that would kill 18 Marines who trusted their government to protect them. Elena Reeves exhaled halfway, let her heart rate drop to 46 beats per minute, became still in the way only true predators could. Not just motionless, but absent, a ghost in the snow, death waiting with infinite patience for the perfect moment. The trigger broke clean. 2.4 seconds of flight time. The bullet crossed 740 meters of storm-racked mountain air, threading through wind that would have pushed lesser shots 4 feet off target, compensating for cold that changed everything about ballistics. Through the scope, she watched the Russian second-in-command drop, watched his bodyguards scatter, watched radio discipline collapse into chaos. Russian voices screamed through intercepted communications, panic replacing professional calm. "Sniper! Commander down!" "Where is she?" Elena worked the bolt. Smooth, fast, already acquiring the second target. Angel 6 had returned, and the storm was just beginning. The second target fell at 695 meters, Western squad leader moving between vehicles, trying to restore order to chaos that was spiraling beyond control. Elena watched him drop through the scope, work the bolt, brass ejecting in a smooth arc that she caught reflexively before it hit the snow. Leave no evidence, old habits from operations that never officially happened. Third target, 720 meters. Radio operator adjusting frequency, trying to establish communications with command elements that were already dead or dying. The shot took him in the center of mass, the radio tumbling from hands that would never transmit another order. Somewhere below in the Marine positions, men were shouting, confused, hearing impacts but unable to locate the shooter, unable to understand that Salvation wore white camouflage and carried a rifle that shouldn't exist. Captain Blackwell's voice cut through the chaos, professional despite confusion. "Where the hell is that coming from? Somebody give me a location on friendly sniper support." No one answered because no one knew, because the shots seemed to come from the storm itself, from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, because Angel 6 was a ghost again, and ghosts didn't follow the rules of the living. Elena repositioned, 40 meters east, using a shallow depression in the terrain. Never shoot twice from the same location. Basic sniper craft that kept you alive when everyone was looking for you. when professional counter-snipers were scanning for muzzle flash and heat signatures and any mistake that would reveal your position. Through the thermal scope, she watched the Russian formation fracturing, leadership dead or dying, communication cut, units losing cohesion as the careful assault plan collapsed into survival instinct. 72 operators becoming just men with guns and no direction, their advantage in numbers meaning nothing when they couldn't identify the threat. But they were still professionals, still trained for exactly this kind of disruption. Someone would adapt, someone would take command, someone would figure out the pattern and start hunting the hunter. The question was whether she could break them completely before that happened. Target 4, PKM machine gunner at 610 meters, setting up his weapon in a position that would devastate the Marine defensive line if he opened fire. That gun could put down 800 rounds per minute, could shred sandbags and flesh with equal efficiency, could turn defensive positions into kill zones. Elena waited 3 seconds, watching his movements, calculating the shot. Patience was 90% of sniping. The other 10% was math and the willingness to pull triggers when it mattered. He bent to adjust the bipod, exposed himself for 2 seconds. She fired. The machine gunner slumped over his weapon, the PKM silent, the threat eliminated before it could manifest into Marine casualties. 8 minutes, 4 kills. 4 pieces of Russian command structure eliminated, their assault stalling, breaking apart like ice under pressure it wasn't designed to withstand. The Marines pressed forward, not understanding why the enemy was suddenly disorganized, not caring, just capitalizing on chaos they couldn't explain, but recognized as opportunity. Elena checked her ammunition. 11 rounds left, 68 targets remaining. Not enough to win the battle outright, but enough to save 18 Marines if she chose her shots with the precision that had made her legendary. She went back to work. Target 5. Replacement commander at 815 meters, the man who'd stepped up after the first leader fell, trying to impose order through force of will and tactical experience. She watched him through the scope, saw him pointing, directing fire teams, saw the moment he realized his predecessor's tactics were failing, saw him open his mouth to give new orders. Then he was gone, the bullet arriving before sound, before his men could react, before they could understand that every leader who stood up would fall. That command was a death sentence when Angel 6 was hunting. The intercepted Russian communications went wild, panic replacing discipline, fear bleeding into voices that were trained to stay calm under fire. "It's her! It's Angel 6! The ghost is hunting us!" They knew. Of course they knew. No one else shot like this. No one else could make these eliminations in these conditions. No one else turned impossible into inevitable with mathematical precision and absolute confidence. The legend they thought safely dead was killing them from the storm, and recognition was worse than ignorance, because now they understood they weren't fighting Americans. They were fighting something that transcended nationality into pure lethality. Elena worked the bolt, brass ejected, she caught it, pocketed it. 10 rounds remaining, but something had changed in the enemy pattern. Movement becoming more cautious, more deliberate, thermal signatures taking cover with the discipline of people who'd realized they were being hunted by someone better than good. A bullet cracked past her head, 5 inches right, supersonic snap that meant someone had found her. Someone good, someone tracking her movement and reading her displacement pattern. Counter sniper. She rolled left on pure instinct, muscle memory from 1,000 training scenarios where hesitation meant simulated death, and simulated death meant running extra miles until you learned to move without thinking. Snow erupted where she'd been prone, second shot closer, adjusting for her movement, leading the target with professional accuracy. This was different now. This wasn't faceless targets at distance. This was predator versus predator, professional versus professional. Angel 6 versus someone who might actually be good enough to kill her. She calculated his position from bullet trajectory, from the angle of impact, from the timing between shots. Northeast Ridge, 880 meters, elevated position, thermal scope good enough to pick up her heat signature through the snow despite her white camouflage. Dmitry Volkov himself had to be. No one else would take the shot. No one else would abandon command to personally hunt the woman who'd killed his sister 8 years ago in Belgrade. This was personal now, family blood calling for family blood, revenge transcending tactical objectives into something older and darker than professional military operations. She couldn't stay in this position. He had her ranged, tracked. The third shot would connect if she gave him the window. But moving meant exposing herself, meant giving him another opportunity to fire, meant playing his game instead of hers. So she did what he wouldn't expect, what no rational person would do, what separated Angel 6 from everyone else who claimed to be elite. She went to ground completely, rolled into the depression, pressed herself absolutely flat, pulled snow over her body and rifle, became terrain, became nothing, became invisible to thermal imaging, because dead things don't radiate heat the same way living things do. And if you could slow your breathing enough, drop your core temperature enough, become still enough, you could disappear. Through the scope, barely visible above the snow line, she scanned the ridge. There. Heat bloom at 880 meters. Prone position, good discipline, not moving except to scan, searching for the heat signature that had vanished, trying to reacquire. The problem was her rifle, still warm from firing, still radiating heat despite the cold. He'd pick it up eventually. Professional counter-snipers always did. It was just a matter of time before thermal imaging found the anomaly that didn't belong. She had maybe 30 seconds before he located her again. Not enough time to relocate without exposing herself to his field of fire. Not enough time to get an angle without becoming a target. So she did the only thing that made tactical sense, the thing that would either save her or kill her. No middle ground, no safety net, just commitment to a choice that couldn't be unmade. She army crawled toward him, straight toward the threat, closing distance, getting behind his scanning arc, using terrain to mask movement. 70 meters through the snow, dragging the rifle, staying below the terrain line, the cold soaking through everything now, her core temperature dropping, hypothermia creeping in like an assassin, fingers losing sensation, toes going numb. Pain was just information. Temperature was just data. The mission was absolute. Everything else was negotiable. She remembered training, Frank Harlow's voice cutting through Arctic warfare course in conditions that made Montana feel tropical. Pain is your body complaining. Cold is just a condition. The mission is the only thing that matters. Everything else is noise. Young Elena Reeves had thought he was insane. Now she understood. Pain was just your body complaining. Cold was just a condition. Death was just a possibility. And the mission was keeping 18 Marines alive, regardless of cost. She crawled 90 meters, angled east, circled behind his position through a route that kept her below his sightline, found what she needed. A frozen stream bed, natural depression carved by water that had turned to ice months ago, deep enough to hide her completely if she was willing to pay the price. She slid into it. The cold was instant, shocking, apocalyptic. Minus 24 air was one thing. Minus 24 ice was something else entirely. Was the kind of cold that stopped hearts and froze blood and killed you from the inside out. She submerged, let the ice water cover her. Her thermal signature would vanish completely. The enemy thermal scope would see nothing but frozen stream, just terrain, just nature, just landscape. Counted to 30 while her body screamed, muscles cramping, every instinct demanding she surface and breathe and live instead of drowning in frozen water for a tactical advantage that might not even work. Counted to 60 while vision narrowed, core temperature dropping into dangerous territory, hypothermia transitioning from risk to certainty, from manageable to critical. Counted to 90 while consciousness started to slip, while the edges of the world went gray and soft and almost welcoming, while dying from cold started to feel easier then continuing to fight it. Then crawled downstream underwater, 200 meters, no breathing, just movement and will, just the promise to Owen Garrett and the memory of Jackson Reed, and the understanding that some things mattered more than survival. Surfaced 100 meters behind Volkov's position, gasped for air, her whole body convulsing with shivers, hypothermia setting in hard now, critical, life-threatening, the kind that killed you regardless of what happened next, unless you got warm immediately. She had maybe 20 minutes before it became irreversible, maybe 40 before it killed her, regardless of intervention. But she had position now, and position was everything. Volkov was still scanning her old location, still searching with professional patience, good at his job, well-trained, disciplined, experienced. Not good enough. Range now 920 meters, extreme for these conditions, pushing the absolute limits of what was possible, even with perfect equipment and ideal circumstances. Uphill angle 6 degrees, wind gusting unpredictably between 20 and 30 knots. Her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the rifle steady, vision blurring at the edges, core temperature critically low. This was the shot they'd talk about if anyone ever knew she'd taken it, the shot that would prove Angel 6 was more than human. Or maybe less. Maybe something in between. Maybe something that had traded humanity for capability and couldn't quite remember which mattered more. She wedged the rifle against a rock outcropping, used it to stabilize because she couldn't trust her hands, couldn't trust her body, couldn't trust anything except the math and the muscle memory and the 5 years of practice that made impossible into routine. Breathed on the scope to clear condensation, waited for her body to stop shaking long enough to aim. 10 seconds passed, 20, her vision graying at the edges, fingers white and nearly nerveless. The hypothermia fighting for control of motor functions she needed to take the shot. The wind dropped. 3-second window, maybe 4, the kind of opportunity that came once and never repeated. She fired on instinct more than calculation. The rifle bucked. She barely felt it through the cold and adrenaline and the edge of consciousness that was threatening to drag her down into darkness. 3.6 seconds of flight time. Through the scope, 920 meters away, Dmitry Volkov slumped over his rifle. Didn't move again. Wouldn't move again. The man who'd come for revenge, who'd spent 8 years hunting the woman who killed his sister, who'd finally found her and died without ever knowing for certain whether the ghost was real. Justice for Anya. Justice for Belgrade. Justice for the cycle of violence that turned families into casualties and casualties into motivations for more violence that never stopped until everyone was dead or too tired to continue. Elena tried to stand. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. Hypothermia had progressed too far. Core temperature too low. Motor control compromised beyond the point where will could overcome physiology. This was how people died in mountains. Not from bullets, but from cold that crept in while you were focused on other things. That killed you slowly while you thought you were winning. She reached into her medical kit, found the emergency epinephrine auto-injector, slammed it into her thigh through winter gear. The medication hit her system like electricity. Heart rate spiked, vision cleared marginally. Muscle control returned just enough to move, just enough to matter. 9 rounds remaining, but there was no one left to shoot. The enemy was running, full rout, vehicles grinding away through snow, men on foot scattering into darkness. The professional assault force had become survivors fleeing from a ghost, from a legend, from the understanding that staying meant dying and running meant maybe living if you were fast enough and lucky enough. She'd fired 12 shots, 12 Russian command elements eliminated, 12 impossible kills in conditions no one should attempt, in weather that made shooting a fantasy, in circumstances that would have stopped anyone except Angel 6. She saved the weapon, ejected the magazine, started to disassemble the rifle, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. Hypothermia, critical now. She dropped the bolt twice before managing separation. forced herself to move back toward the Marine positions. 50 meters felt like 50 miles, her vision graying, legs trembling, the epinephrine wearing off, hypothermia winning the race against her will to survive. 40 meters, she could see the bunker now, so close, almost safe, almost home. 30 meters, her legs gave out. She went down hard in the snow. Couldn't get up, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except lie there and wait for the end. 20 meters, crawling now, dragging herself through powder, rifle components scattered in her pockets. Had to hide them, had to maintain something, had to keep the secret even if it killed her. 10 meters, she could hear voices, Marines calling out, searching for casualties. The battle over, the enemy routed. 18 men alive because one woman had broken cover to keep a promise. 5 meters, almost there, using the last of her strength to arrange herself, make sure her legs were positioned to show the limp. Make sure nothing looked wrong except the hypothermia that was very, very real. She collapsed against the bunker entrance, pulled snow over herself, made it look like she'd been caught in a drift trying to help someone. Then let the cold take her. Let the shaking consume her. Let darkness creep in at the edges. Hayes found her 30 seconds later. "Jesus Christ, Ashford, what are you doing out here?" She couldn't answer, teeth chattering too violently, body convulsing with shivers that weren't performance, that were the real thing. That meant she was minutes from irreversible organ damage if someone didn't intervene. He grabbed her, started dragging her into the bunker, shouting for help, his voice carrying genuine fear that suggested he understood how close she was to dying. Blackwell appeared, then Harlow, faces grim with concern that would have been touching if she could feel anything except cold. "Get her inside immediately. Warming blankets, hot fluids." Harlow's voice was controlled, professional, but his eyes met hers for just a second. Understanding passed between them. "She's got maybe 20 minutes before this becomes irreversible." They carried her into the bunker, wrapped her in thermal blankets, forced warm water between lips that chattered against the rim. Through the shivers she managed words, the story she'd prepared, the lie that had to be believable because everything depended on it. "The shooting. So much shooting. I was so scared." "You stayed in the bunker like ordered?" Blackwell asked, voice tight with something that might have been suspicion or relief or both. She nodded, couldn't speak more, but her story was simple. She'd been terrified, stayed hidden, that's all. Just a nurse doing what she was told. Nothing more, nothing heroic, nothing that required explanation beyond human fear in the face of violence. Except Hayes was looking at her jacket, at the ice crystals that had formed in a particular pattern, at the way snow had frozen to fabric in formations that told stories if you knew how to read them. "Captain," his voice was quiet, careful. "Her jacket, that's creek ice formation. I grew up in Montana. I know what creek ice looks like on clothing." Blackwell stared, processing, calculating. "What?" "She's been in water, recent, within the last hour. Full submersion based on the pattern." They looked at her, really looked, at her soaked clothing under the jacket, at the ice in her hair, at boots wet through despite being waterproof, at the evidence that didn't match the story, that suggested she'd been somewhere she shouldn't have been, doing something that didn't align with orders. Harlow stepped in smoothly, the lie coming easy from decades of practice. She was probably trying to help someone, saw a Marine down, tried to reach them, got disoriented in the storm, fell in the frozen creek. Lucky she made it back at all. It was a good lie, better than Elena could have managed through the hypothermia. Plausible enough that Blackwell wanted to believe it even if Hayes clearly had doubts. "Stay with her," Blackwell ordered Hayes. "Make sure she doesn't die of exposure. We'll discuss this later." He left, radio exploding now with reports, helicopters overhead, the quick reaction force landing in force despite weather that should have kept them grounded for hours. JSOC Beacon had done its job, brought hell from above, brought salvation for 18 Marines who would never know how close they'd come to dying. Hayes stayed for another long moment, looking at her with eyes that saw too much, that understood something wasn't right about this picture, that recognized the timeline didn't quite work if you thought about it carefully. Then he left too, back to his duties, back to helping with casualties and securing the perimeter, and all the tasks that came after violence ended and survival began. Only Harlow remained, waiting until they were alone, until no listening devices could capture what came next. He leaned close, whispered below the range of any recording equipment. The rifle? She managed to pat her jacket. The components were there, hidden in pockets, safe for now, recoverable later when she had motor control back and could hide them properly. How many? She held up both hands, showed 12 fingers through shaking that wasn't entirely from cold. Christ, Elena, 20 kills in these conditions. He closed his eyes, looked older suddenly, tired in ways that went beyond physical exhaustion into something spiritual. You just made yourself real again. You know that, right? The Russians will know by morning. Everyone will know Angel 6 is alive. Kira, she whispered through chattering teeth, clinging to the name like a lifeline, like the identity she'd built could survive what she'd just done if she just believed hard enough. I'm Kira. Not anymore, not after tonight. The bunker flap opened. General Thomas Carver stepped in, 60 years old, hard face that had made decisions most people couldn't imagine, eyes that had seen everything twice and been impressed by nothing. He looked at Elena, then at Harlow, assessed the situation with the speed of someone who'd spent 40 years making tactical decisions in seconds that would have consequences for decades. Angel 6? He asked quietly, voice pitched for privacy. Harlow nodded once. Carver studied her for a long moment, at her shaking, at her hypothermia, at the woman who'd just eliminated 12 enemy combatants in conditions that would have stopped anyone else, that had nearly killed her in the process. Get her warm, get her stable, he turned to Harlow, and get her story straight because half this unit suspects something impossible happened tonight. They're going to ask questions we can't answer honestly. What do we tell them? The truth we can live with. Unknown sniper support, classified asset, above their security clearance. Carver looked back at Elena. Angel 6 doesn't exist. She died in 2019. This is just a nurse who got hypothermia trying to help people. That's the official story. Anyone who says different gets reminded about classification and career consequences. He left, command authority departing, leaving only the mess to clean up, the lies to maintain, the fiction that had to hold because truth would get people killed. The helicopters were landing now, 4 CH-53E Super Stallions, the whole mountains shaking with rotor wash, Marines shouting, orders being barked, wounded being triaged and loaded for medical evacuation to facilities that could handle trauma beyond field medicine. Through the chaos, Elena heard one voice, young, scared, searching. Private Owen Garrett calling for his squad leader, looking for familiar faces, making sure his brothers were alive, that he'd survived to hold his daughter, that the promise a nurse had made to him hours ago had somehow come true despite impossible odds. She closed her eyes. He was alive. They were all alive. Casualty reports came through the radio. 3 Marines killed in initial contact, 9 wounded, but 15 walking, 15 going home. 15 futures that would continue because one woman had chosen war over peace for 6 hours. Owen Garrett would hold Sophia Elizabeth, would watch her grow up, graduate high school, get married, have children of her own, would have decades of life because Angel 6 had come back from the dead one more time. The cost could come later. When the world discovered the ghost was real, when every enemy she'd ever made started hunting, when the peaceful life ended for good and running became the only option. For now, 15 Marines would go home. And that was enough. That had to be enough. The medics loaded her onto a stretcher, carried her through the storm to the waiting helicopter. As they moved, she saw the Marine positions, saw evidence of the battle, spent brass everywhere, scorch marks, blood frozen in the snow. Saw Captain Blackwell standing near the command post, staring at her as they carried her past. His face unreadable, but his eyes asking questions he wouldn't voice. Questions about timeline, in creek ice, and shots that seemed to come from nowhere. Saw Hayes watching her, his expression knowing something he couldn't prove, suspecting truths he'd never confirm, choosing silence over answers because Marines protected Marines, even when they didn't fully understand what they were protecting. Saw young Garrett, alive, whole, searching for his gear, preparing for extraction home to a daughter who would know her father, because impossible had become possible in a Montana blizzard. She was loaded into the helicopter. Harlow climbed in beside her. The engines screamed. The rotors bit air that resisted. They lifted off, the mountain dropping away beneath them, the storm still raging, the battle site becoming invisible in white chaos. Inside the helicopter, 15 Marines sat in jump seats, alive, breathing, going home. Some wounded, some in shock, but alive. Surviving an engagement they should have lost because someone impossible had intervened. Elena closed her eyes, let the helicopter carry her away from the place where she'd broken cover, where she'd destroyed 5 years of careful lies, where Angel 6 had come back from the dead to keep a promise made in a Syrian alley to a dying man who deserved better than he got. Harlow leaned close, had to shout over the rotors. "They know, Elena. The Russians intercepted communications, mentioned Angel. Every enemy you ever made will know you're alive by morning. The Chechens, the Serbians, everyone who wants you dead." She nodded, knew it was true, knew what it meant, knew the price she just paid for keeping a promise. "The peaceful life is over," he continued. "You can't be Kira Ashford anymore. They'll hunt you, find you. You're a target now, forever." She opened her eyes, met his gaze, let him see the decisions she'd already made, the choice that defined who she was, more than names or identities, or anything except the daily commitment to save instead of destroy. "Then let them hunt. I'll keep saving people. That's who I am now. That's who I choose to be." "You killed 12 men tonight. That's not saving. That's ending. To save 18. The math works, Frank. It has to work." Harlow sat back, studied her. The woman he'd trained, the weapon she'd become, the healer she tried to be. All of it contained in one person who couldn't quite reconcile the contradictions, but kept trying anyway. "What do you want to happen now?" She thought about it, about the rifle hidden in her pockets, about the medical kit waiting back at base, about the choice between Elena and Kira, between killing and healing, between the warrior and the nurse. "I want to go back to being Kira Ashford. I want to save lives, not take them. That's all I've ever wanted since Jackson died." "That's not possible now, the world knows." "Then make it possible. You did it once, killed Elena Reeves, created Kira Ashford. Do it again, better this time." "How?" She smiled barely, through the hypothermia and exhaustion and the weight of 12 more bodies on her conscience. "I was in the bunker like ordered. I didn't see anything. I got disoriented in the storm, fell in the creek, nearly died from exposure. That's the story. That's the truth that matters. And the shots, the eliminations, the impossible kills? Unknown sniper support, classified. Like the general said, above everyone's clearance." Harlow shook his head, but there was something like admiration in the gesture, like recognition that she'd found the only path forward that didn't end with her running forever. The Marines saw too much, suspect too much. They'll talk. They'll figure it out eventually. Let them talk. Let them guess. As long as there's no proof, it's just stories, just legends, just another ghost story Marines tell to feel better about surviving when they shouldn't have. She closed her eyes again, let the exhaustion take her, Let the hypothermia drag her down into sleep that was too deep to dream, too complete to allow nightmares. I'm tired, Frank. Tired of being a weapon. I want to heal. Please let me heal. He didn't answer, just sat with her as the helicopter flew through the storm, as the mountains passed beneath, as the battle site disappeared into memory and classification and official records that would bury truth under layers of plausible deniability. 1 year later, Richmond, Virginia, January 2025. Kira Ashford sat in her apartment, small one-bedroom, quiet neighborhood, the kind of anonymous urban housing where no one knew their neighbors and everyone preferred it that way. She'd saved 127 lives in the past year. Cardiac arrests, traumatic injuries, critical hemorrhages, respiratory failures. Each one a small redemption, each one balancing against the 201 that would always define her operational history. Her phone buzzed. Text message from a number that resolved into a name she recognized. Thank you for my life, for my Marines, for keeping promises when it cost you everything. You'll always be a hero to those who know, even if the world never does. Captain Reed Blackwell. She stared at the message, felt something warm in her chest, recognition, gratitude, the acknowledgement she told herself didn't matter, but absolutely did. She typed back carefully. Just doing what anyone would do. Take care of your Marines, Captain. They're worth protecting. His response came immediately. Not anyone, someone extraordinary. If you ever need anything, anytime, any place, any reason, you call. We remember. We honor our debts. Always. She put the phone down, looked around her apartment, at the small life she'd built, at the normal existence she'd fought so hard to achieve. On the refrigerator, one photograph. Owen Garrett holding Sophia, 1 year old now, both smiling, healthy, alive, real. The note attached said simply, "Thank you for giving me my future, the Garrett family." This was enough. This small life, these quiet victories, this peaceful existence built from lies and harder truths. Elena Reeves had been a weapon, necessary for a time, effective beyond measure, but incomplete. Just a tool pointed at targets by people who understood geopolitics, but never pulled triggers themselves. Kira Ashford was a healer, imperfect, limited by physics and resources, but whole, complete, human in ways Angel 6 had never been allowed to be. She could live with being Kira, could embrace the limp and the lies and the constant vigilance, could accept the loneliness that came with secrets too dangerous to share. As long as she kept saving people, as long as promises meant something, as long as the 18 Marines from Montana stayed safe and alive and future-bound. The rest didn't matter. The bounties, the hunters, the people who wanted Angel 6 dead more than they wanted peace. Let them come. She'd face them as a nurse who'd learned to survive, as a woman who'd chosen healing over killing, as someone who understood that the greatest strength wasn't eliminating enemies, but saving friends, protecting innocence, keeping promises that mattered more than life itself. Outside, Richmond slept. Inside, a legend pretended to be ordinary. And somewhere in the margins between myth and reality, 18 Marines lived because someone impossible had broken cover to keep a promise made to a dead man in a Syrian alley 8 years ago. The world would never know the full truth, would never understand what happened in that Montana blizzard, would never realize the limping nurse in their emergency room was the greatest sniper alive. But truth didn't need recognition. Promises didn't need witnesses. Heroes didn't need parades. They just needed purpose. And Kira Ashford had found hers. She saved lives. That's what she did. That's who she was. That's who she'd chosen to become. And if someday circumstances forced her to be Elena again, if some crisis demanded Angel 6 return, if 18 more Marines needed saving and no one else could do it, well, the rifle was in storage. The training never faded. The warrior never truly died. She just learned to sleep, learned to wait, learned to be patient. Because some angels didn't need heaven. They just needed a reason to fight. And protecting the innocent was reason enough. Always had been, always would be.